This intro is going to be extremely short for the sole reason that Lilek very kindly, graciously, and therapeutically decided it was time somebody else asked the questions. Luckily, she was willing to undertake this sacrificial task. The result is a reflective, revealing, and fun conversation about Twoandamic, me, community work, society, and the ways topics and guests are found to join me on the podcast, not to mention some other topical issues of interest. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And thank you, Dr. Lilek.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro e Twoandamic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye Twoandamic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e Twoandamic. Wola wachokre wabed piny biwawinje ero chako momit ndi Twoandamic podcast makende.
I'm joined by Lilek, who today is, actually appearing in a slightly different role. But anyway, first of all, how are you, Lilek?
Well, I'm fine. I wanted to say welcome to your podcast.
Yeah,
right?
sorry.
I'm going to be the one who interviews you today. No problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that's habit energies. But I'm going to take on the role. You're not going to be able to derail.
Okay.
So, how are you?
Yeah, I'm actually not bad. Suddenly, I developed a bit of a headache, but it's amazing that this would happen at such an opportune moment. I'm well, thank you. And can I ask how you are?
Yes, I'm good. I went dancing last night. And it was a really great night. As a therapist, which you wanted to point out. First of all, I have to take care of myself too, like with all of the problems I'm listening to. No, but I'm a solution-focused therapist. So usually I try to talk, so just to let you know, I try to talk about things more from a point of view which is positive and resource-based and hopefully helpful. Of course, other therapists do that too, but the kind of therapy that I'm following is very much centered in that.
Fantastic. I straight away to my mind, I have questions, but I'm not allowed to ask them today. So I'll make a note for future purposes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So while you make your notes.
Yes, doctor.
I really I'm not a podcast person. So I have been on 2 podcasts now without even listening to many podcasts. 5 episodes in your podcast and 1 episode in another podcast.
Okay.
There are more podcasts, but now I want to know more about your podcast. And first of all, I want to know how this came to be. What was the idea behind it?
Yeah, it's a cool question, because actually I think it's changed from what it was at the beginning to what it became. So first of all, I used to be really active on social media because I found it very entertaining. I love listening, as you can probably imagine, to different people's ideas and so on. And I really appreciated that. But then what I found was on social media, there was a very, I won't say coordinated, but a distinct development of hate speech, of hatefulness, of negativity, of pure just attacking people for being whatever they may have been, whether it was black or a religion, or if it was because they were female. And all of these negative comments were so negative, it's just too positive a term, really horrible. And so I came off social media completely. But then so many things were happening in the political sphere, and I'd be watching the news or reading something, and then straight away I'd look for my Twitter icon to write something about it, and it wasn't there anymore because I'd removed myself from social media. So what I wanted to do was create a channel where I could listen on the one hand to other people's opinions and voices, but also be able to express myself without the limitation of, I don't know, 180 characters, and make sure that I had a voice as well, within the ether, the internet ether, and so on. And that was basically why I began it. But then I quickly realized I learned so much from all the people I listened to. And since then, it's just been a project to branch out and develop my awareness. And that's what I continue to do. So.
Okay, so it's a kind of personal development project too. So
it has become that. I mean, people like yourself, and all the people that I have, I don't want to name them all now because I'm so happy to say there are so many people that I've spoken to, but all of the people that I've spoken to, I've learned so much from them. And they've inspired me to then go on and learn more about what they were talking about. I really have learned a lot.
Okay, we'll get to that later. But I don't even know when the podcast started.
Yeah, this will be, when I finish this year, it will be like the 3rd full year.
Okay, so it was during COVID times, was it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, January 2021 was when it started, basically.
Okay, so right, 2021. Has it helped you somehow, or did you not struggle with the situation around COVID? Because it's really nice to be able to talk to so many different people without restriction, and the internet has made that possible for all of us, and I think it has helped us to connect, and in some ways connect even more. And wider. I mean, I can say that from my own activism, I was talking to people from Extinction Rebellion from all over Germany, and we might not have done that if it hadn't been for the pandemic.
Yeah, I've been told that it's not necessarily the best thing to compare one situation with another and to say, yeah, but there are always people in worse situations than mine, and that's not the best way to look at the world. In this case, what I can say is that my awareness of how other communities really struggled in comparison to how we dealt with things in Germany, that I felt it was unfair of me to complain. Yes, there were restrictions, but we were allowed to go out if it was for exercise. We were allowed to go out to go to the shop under controlled conditions, of course, but we were provided with solutions for doing this. There was medical support when we needed to. I even had an operation on my nose during Corona times. At the beginning, when I started the podcast, I spoke with a person in Bolivia. I spoke with a person in China. I spoke with a person in Cyprus. I spoke with a person in Italy, and I learned about how these varied communities dealt with things. And for many people, the restrictions that we had would have represented liberty to them.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so for example, some people in South America were basically given bleach as a way of dealing with or killing the coronavirus. So they would basically pump bleach into their systems. And obviously that never happened in Germany. Very quickly, within a year, we had a vaccine. And while we were being given our corona vaccines, these people were still being given bleach.
I thought that was a joke, actually. That was that famous Mr. Trump joke, but it seems to have been reality in some places. That's horrible.
Yeah. And then also some of the people I spoke with in Italy, there were police on the streets basically saying you can't go more than a certain distance from your homes. So there were like young people who played sports, and they basically had to run up and down their street because they couldn't go beyond those areas. And I remember when I went running, no police officer said to me, "Oh, you're 3 kilometers from your home. You have to go back. What are you doing?" So there are lots of relative freedoms that we enjoyed during those restrictions that a lot of other countries didn't have. And I also remember a German student of mine, when he traveled to China for business during this period, he had to spend 2 weeks in his hotel room. He was not allowed
Yes.
to leave his hotel room for 2 weeks. And so we had English lessons every day, more or less, so that he could relieve his burden in some way. And that was really hard.
Okay, so you were also able to play the therapist at that time.
The very amateur therapist, yeah.
Well, that might be very helpful. And well, it's called the social podcast, right? So
It is.
what makes it a social podcast?
The fact that I put communities, people to the forefront, that I take a social interest in humanity, that it's not about promoting my political ideas. It's not about promoting business. It's not about promoting economics. It's about people. It's about bringing people together. It's about finding commonalities and giving voices to those communities which have not been the loudest in the past.
Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in that, but first of all, I would like to ask some very, very simple questions. For example, I'm interested in knowing, what do you like most about the podcast? You have kind of answered it already, but like, when you do a podcast, what do you enjoy the most? And also in thinking about who to interview next.
Who to interview next is almost, I wouldn't quite say scattergun in the sense that I just randomly send out messages. As we were talking before, and you mentioned inspiration, and I think inspiration is something which it has moments. It turns up in your life, and you either grasp it or you don't. And with regards to choosing who I approach for the podcast, it's the same. So I remember going through Twitter, and Extinction Rebellion was quite prominent in that particular moment that I was watching what was happening. And so I contacted Extinction Rebellion because I wanted to interview somebody, and that's how we got into contact with one another. A few weeks ago on Instagram, Omas gegen Rechts, Grandmothers Against the Right, they were also quite prominent, and I contacted them, and I'm hopeful that we were supposed to have one, but it didn't work out. But hopefully in the future that will happen too. It's really being inspired by the messages that other people communicate. And because social media is so big, I miss so many things that I know other people miss a lot of things too. So if I have a method of capturing a moment of conversation with these inspirational groups and people and saving it in my podcast, then other people can come back to those whenever they want.
Amen. And is that what you like most about the podcast, or is there something else?
I'm sure you've had this too, because you are perhaps even more interested in people than I am. I've had so many great moments, conversations with friends, with family, with people I don't even know anymore. And I wish I had recorded them. I wish I had some way of revisiting those moments, but they're gone, except to my aging mind. With this podcast, I have captured a moment which can be revisited, and I like that.
All right. I mean, it almost sounds like it's your legacy.
Oh God. Yeah. Until I die and stop paying the bills. But yeah, of course, then.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a trace you leave behind, right?
I guess.
And also you give other people the chance to leave their traces and to express themselves and maybe influence other people in a positive way. And what do you like the least about the podcast?
Editing. I'm so bad. I've become a lot better. The problem is, the better you become, the longer it takes. I had a podcast with somebody a couple of months ago, It was a really good podcast, but there was internet connection problem, and this person was in Germany, so it's not like we were talking across continents. But every 10 or 15 seconds, the connection wavered, and sometimes, or in the middle of a word. So I had to go and then cut out the space that was created in between each word every 10
Oh my
seconds.
God.
Yeah. So a podcast of like 40 minutes took me 6.5 hours to edit. And that was so frustrating. But yeah, that's it had to be done.
It was worth it.
I hope so.
Well, I would have to listen to the podcast to tell you.
I'll tell you later which one it is.
Yeah, sure. And you already mentioned it a little bit, but I want to know more concretely. What have you learned about yourself through this role as an interviewer on the podcast?
I've been very generously complimented a few times for being a very good listener. And I always felt that I like to listen to people. So whenever a friend or somebody had a problem, I always said, look, let's get together and just tell me what's going on. And so I kind of have always tried to improve my abilities as a listener. But in the podcast, what I realized was that it's important to give the other people the opportunity, a complete free reign of their speech. And I think that's what I've really developed further. So even now, quite often I feel a thought comes to mind and I want to jump in, but very often, usually I manage to control myself. So there's two things. So listening has improved as ability and also self-control.
Okay. But and how come you were such a good listener in the first place?
I don't actually know the exact reason for. I think because in some ways when I grew up, so my dad when I was a child, and my brothers, we were children, he was very strict. So when he wanted to focus on the movie, he made sure there was no background noise. And I think I learned, okay, I won't say anything.
Okay, so you actually used it for the good.
I think it was developed that way naturally.
Okay. Yeah, that's how sometimes we can use things that we learned in our childhood, which were maybe not so positive in the first place, or we felt restricted or whatever, so that we can use them later on when we decide how to use them or how to develop them further, if so, how. And I think listening is a very important thing, because you can learn a lot about yourself listening to other people, and also, of course, about other people. And this being said, you already said that you've met so many amazing, interesting people, but I want to know, like, what comes to mind when you think of a very special moment in the podcast series, or a person that has left a big impression on you, or what the person has said has left a big impression on you?
A couple of times and this was before I connected with the video, so now we can see each other, but there were occasions when we could not see each other, and people would tell me stories which I found quite emotional, and luckily, as it's a podcast, you don't see the emotion, but there were some places where basically my heart dropped into my stomach, and I was like, oh my God, did that really happen? Other scenarios have simply been that I've had to go away and learn or relearn what I thought I knew. There's a great movie which I often quote called Town Hall, and one of the statements is that the only thing new in this world is the history you do not yet know. And I quote that quite a bit, because I think it's important that people realize that there are so many elements to history we have no idea of. But if we were to know what those events had been and how they had transpired, that maybe we would see the world in a different way. And listening to people online, for example, talking about gender equality, for example, talking about racial equality, colonialism, economics, and white supremacy, and all of these topics. I've gone back, I've done some research, and I've been, wow, how could I not have been taught this when I was growing up? How could I not have seen how women were being treated in my class, or girls, when I was growing up? And that's a heavy reflection, I think.
Mm-hmm. But are you blaming yourself?
I think in some ways I was also a part of the system, and so therefore, if I could happily go about my tasks without seeing or feeling how other people may have felt, then I think I had to work. That told me I had to work on my observational abilities. I'll give you another example. When I was, I think 7 or 8, I think it was 6 or 7 years old. So absolutely zero blame could be attached to me as a child, because I would never attach any blame to a child of that age, or even up to 16 or 17. But when I was 6 or 7, my tutor was sexually abusing girls in my class, and I only found this out later when there was a small newspaper advert, and he'd been imprisoned for child sexual abuse, and I never knew about it, and I think this also told me you got to be far more aware, because that just cannot happen basically under your nose and you don't notice it. And the worst thing is, it happened again when I was 13, 14, 15, that girls in my school were being sexually abused by a teacher who I actually had a very good relationship with. And again, I never knew. And yeah, it's just not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to see that we can create more awareness, and at the same time we need to forgive ourselves for what we have not seen, because we might not have been able to see it at that time with the information or we had, or with the mindset we had. And if we cannot let that go, we'll burden ourselves more and more, because usually we look at the mistakes we've made in our lives, and not at the things that have gone well, but the things that have gone wrong. And those are the things that bother us, not the things that have gone well. And so this is also something that I try to discuss with my clients about the mistakes they have made have helped them to create something good out of it. And of course, which were the things that helped them, the positive things that they have experienced in their lives, and also the positive things that they have created. And I guess the podcast is one of them in your life.
I hope so. I keep doing it, so it must be something quite positive. Yeah.
And more on the light side, Zach. We have our anecdotes between you and I. But is there another one, like a funny story that you can tell about the podcast and about a person that you interviewed?
Yeah, that's the misunderstanding that we had about your who you were and your gender.
My identity.
Yeah. The Polish male that you were. No, I haven't actually got anything quite. Well, there's something a little bit funny. So I do also a podcast sort of series with my older brother, about books. So we're both crazy about literature. So and Greg reads a lot more than I do, and he's also a guy with just a ridiculous amount of knowledge. But we were supposed to do this podcast as brothers, so there are three of us. But my little brother Arms, he doesn't want to appear on the podcast. He doesn't want to speak, in a public domain, as it were. So for our first podcast with Greg, we had Rubber Duck to represent our little brother, and every time we wanted to have a mini break, basically the Rubber Duck would quack. And that was quite entertaining. We were supposed to continue that, but the squeak was so loud in the microphone, I had to stop it. But yeah, that was quite entertaining.
So it was Rubber Duck Greg.
Yeah, Rubber Duck Arms. Greg was the one who actually turned up and spoke.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Rubber Duck Arms.
Yeah.
What did Arms say about it?
He refused to comment, I think. I guess he laughed it off. The thing is about Armin, he's extremely witty. He's a clever chap. He's extremely funny. And it's such a shame that he doesn't come on, because whenever we get together, just the three brothers, and occasionally with our uncle as well, Uncle Hare, who's bald, whenever we get together, we have such a funny time. We just laugh at each other the whole time, and it's extremely entertaining. And this is one of those moments that I'd love to capture, but I can't.
It's funny because as a Buddhist, I understand that, but it's a grasping, right? This is like impermanence, and those moments you can remember, but it is something that is also something that we can let go. It's like when I see people watching a beautiful sunset. Nowadays, they don't watch anymore. They film it. They put it on Instagram. They do a snapshot video about it. It's like, look, reality is right in front of your eyes, and you just try to transform it. As soon as you see it, you try to grab it and own it. And those moments we cannot own. We can just experience them and live them and enjoy them in the moment, and of course enjoy them again in our memory. But also, this is futile.
Yeah, and you remind me of another story. I was once before Corona, I had a lunch break, and I was sitting in a park on a bench and reading news on my phone, and a woman walked past, and she started speaking to me. And this was before I could speak German. I said, sorry, my German's not very good. So she switched to English, and she said, look around you. You're sitting in this lovely park, and look at all these fantastic colors, but you don't see it because you're looking at your phone. And she said, I'm sorry, that's all I wanted to say. And then she walked away, and I thought, wow.
Well, and nowadays, that was, I think, some years ago, right, Zach?
Yeah.
When people weren't looking at their phones 24/7 yet, and now it has become such a habit, and we're just glued to our phones, and we cannot even sometimes see other people because the phone is between us. Yeah, it's really something that that changes the way we perceive things, and that we process information. And what I've noticed is that when I was younger, like a teenager, I didn't have a cell phone till my 18th birthday, and only because people were complaining that I was never at home and that they couldn't reach me. And I was like, okay, so I'll get a cell phone, it's fine. And but since then, and also with the evolution of the internet and the use of the internet, my attention span has sized down like 50%. I could concentrate very, very well. Like I could learn a school topic for 3 hours, and I couldn't handle any noise around me, but I could concentrate. And now I'm like, oh, I need a break, or I need some distraction, and I could watch a video, and we all know that, right? But for me, I'm very thankful that I had the period before, and now after, because I have a comparison, and I guess that the young people and people who are maybe not as aware, I don't know, and who don't reflect that, they don't have that. They cannot tell. They don't know any better, maybe because they have grown up with it. And I'm so thankful that I have grown up without the internet, without a cell phone. And yeah, my mom, she was a teacher, or yeah, she worked as a teacher, and she had a typewriter. She was
Oh,
preparing the sheets, the exercises on her typewriter. That's what she did, and that's how I grew up, and I didn't miss anything.
that's just crazy. Typewriter. I remember seeing a typewriter in action as well, but that was yeah, it was in Armenian.
17.
Yeah, yeah, and it was even more random. Yeah, for me anyway. Yeah.
And coming back to the podcast, is there I mean, you told me that it's more, it's arbitrary how you choose people and topics, but is there any special topic or person that you absolutely still want to have on the podcast?
Oh, there are loads of people I'd love to have on the podcast, but most of them are beyond my reach. What I would say is that I've prioritized female voices. I feel that even though my podcast is extremely small, I think if there were a million small podcasts like mine, then that would amplify so many times over the number of women who are in public space giving their opinions on things. Because the more we hear women talking about things, the more normal it becomes. And this is why it's very important to have women in positions of management, in influential positions, so that people can actually really realize that this is where they should be in society. We need to maintain that level, or create that level of equality and then maintain it. And this is also why I try to expand other kinds of racial groups as well. I want to talk about racism. I want to talk about discrimination. On top of that, I want to actively increase the number of LGBTQ people who are on the podcast. I think I've only had one person to talk with about that topic, and I want to really improve upon that. I've undertaken this. I've asked questions of people to come on and talk with me. It's not easy to find people who are not already out in the mainstream, as it were, and the people who are already out in the mainstream would naturally seek a far greater form of amplification than what I provide. So yeah, these are the voices that I'm looking for, because I think they need a greater opportunity to express themselves.
And we've already, we're basically talking about a form of activism. That's what I see. And you told me that you were active in London when you were in the, you come from an Armenian background, and you were engaged in the Armenian community. You mentioned that, and I would like to know more about that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I was born in London, so British Armenian, and we had our little community. I think it was of about 12,000 Armenians in London at the time. I went to Armenian Saturday School. I went to Armenian Scouts. I played basketball and football for an Armenian sports team. We spoke Armenian at home. And so it was very much a question of a bubble, but it was a hard bubble. And I basically had two lives. I had the life of my school, and also I had a couple of sports teams which I played for, which were English. But then when I came out of that, I was very clearly in an alternative reality, which was the Armenian community. So we were very active. We would organize events, camps, in some cases, exhibitions, political evenings where we would invite a politician from Armenia or somewhere else to talk about the Armenian community, either in another country or in Armenia. Educational workshops and so on. So we did a lot of things. We had a lot of meetings. There were some years where I would have 4 or 5 meetings a week, and it was it took a lot. It really took a lot. And to be honest, when I left the community, I said to myself, man, why did I give so much time for a situation where people just don't appreciate it? And then, but what I learned was afterwards, in doing my job as an English language trainer, and communicating with, in some cases, high-ranking professionals within their organizations, was that everything I had learned as from a child up until my 30s, when I stopped my participation in the Armenian community because I left the country, I learned organizational techniques. I learned human behavioral, how could I say, observational data I had gathered on human behavior was immense. And so I had all of these people telling me about their problems at work, and I knew exactly who they were talking about. It's just in my case, it was a person with an Armenian name, but they were behaving exactly the same way as, I don't know, Jürgen or Bernd or I don't know what else, Robert. But I knew exactly the kind of things that were going on. And my community was a microcosm of the much larger world. And my process of leaving that was expanding my mind to recognize not just that bubble, but the bigger bubble.
One thought I had was, can you tell an Armenian joke?
Oh, my word.
So I'm just going to put that forward.
Oh, do you know what? I'm terrible at telling jokes. I like to be witty, but I'm terrible at telling jokes. I'm trying to remember an Armenian joke now. You've really put me on the spot. I can't remember.
An Armenian proverb.
Yeah, an Armenian proverb. I'll tell an Armenian proverb, which is it's exactly the same as an international one. Agnen tagan yev adamnen adaman. Which means an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Okay. Is that also how the Armenians had to fight? I mean, or how do you use that?
It's funny because this will probably end up leading us on to another topic which you wanted to raise. There's a famous Armenian Catholicos called Cherimian Hayrik. And he had this very interesting tale to tell of when all of the powers of the world, they came to a meeting. They turned up with a metal ladle, which they would use to take soup from the bowl, as it were, or from the cauldron into their bowl. But the Armenian representative turned up with a ladle made of paper. And when he tried to take his soup, obviously, it didn't work out. Now, one of my immediate responses was, I hope I wasn't the guy that turned up after him, because then I'd have paper in my soup. But what he was clearly trying to say was that when you have other people around you who are armed, who are aggressive, who are violent, you can't always respond with politeness. You can't always respond with diplomacy and education and so on. And this is something that we have to remember. Armenia at the time had been left without a ruler for 600 years. The Ottoman Empire had been basically exterminating Armenians wherever they could, which culminated in the attempt of genocide which started in 1915. And so therefore, there is this huge backdrop to that particular statement. And so, but our Armenians were considered farmers, tradespeople, creative builders, architects in some cases, and so on. They were not fighters. They were forced to learn that, and that's why. Yeah.
I just have this topic in the back of my head that we were talking about last time, which you put on the table, which is identity. And I think that, well, that's for a reason. And I remember just one thing very clearly, that you told me in the episode that you had a very clear, stable sense of identity, and that people were coming and still are coming to you for advice, how to find themselves and whatever. Where's the connection to what you just said? I guess it has something to do with you growing up in a community where you had to identify, like where you had to kind of build a sense of being Armenian, and also you said it was a hard bubble. So there were the others, and there were the insiders and the outsiders, but you were also in both worlds, right? Growing up.
Yeah. I think that's why, because we are taught as human beings to categorize. We have to. This is how we learn. So, okay, we are educated along the lines of what is this, like food. Okay, so this is food, or drink. Okay, this is drink. So we categorize our minds, and we develop our understanding of the world through the categories and the boxes and containers that we create. So when I was growing up, I knew that I was Armenian because that's what we spoke. But I was also forced to go to school. And so at school, people didn't speak Armenian, they spoke English, plus other languages, of course. So I already knew that I had to exist within two different realities. But then because of my natural curiosity, I also very much saw that the world was not simply a question of Armenians and English people. As in, when I went to school in London, there were people from India, people from Pakistan, Bangladesh, people from different African countries, people from different Asian countries. And you can observe these different realities and different cultures. And so you learn a bit more about them. And what I kind of felt about myself is that I can apply different elements of my identity, as it were, at different times, but it's not a conscious decision. So who am I? Okay, I'm a heterosexual male. I have Armenian ethnic origin. I was born in the UK, but I've lived in Italy. I'm now also German. So who am I? And I don't need to make a decision. Actually, what does it matter? If somebody says, "Zach, how are you?" Yeah, I'm all right. I could be better. I could be worse. Other times I'll say, "Okay, who are you, Zach?" And I say, "I'm just Zach." And I don't represent any of the things that I am. I don't speak for anybody who shares any one of these characteristics with me. I just speak for myself. If you agree, then cool. If you don't agree, even better. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think that's a great gift that you got from where I don't really know, but that I guess that helped you navigate the two worlds, and maybe and many other worlds, and helped you take the best out of them.
I don't know where it comes from. I really don't. I think maybe sometime early I read the right book, or I listened to the right people. I can't say. I wish I could say, because then I would teach it. I don't know. But I'm still learning, as in, and that's, as we spoke about with this podcast, I like to think that I know quite a lot about certain things. And the truth is, I'm often confronted with the reality that actually I know a lot less than I thought I knew.
What I was thinking when you were talking was that in my Buddhist tradition, we try to reconnect with the ancestors. So you can blame the good and the bad on your ancestors. When you don't know where something comes from, you can say, "Okay, it's my ancestors." They have to take all of the blame. Now, of course not. That's a joke, but the connection with the ones that came before us is something that we've forgotten mostly in our Western world, and especially I think in the past century, we've had so much trouble, so many wars going on, which are still very well, more or less fresh in our memory, because we have been fighting wars. Humankind has been fighting wars also throughout history, but we can still, we have material, like visual material, films and audios, and we also have experiences in our family, and even if we don't know about them, we can feel them somehow. That's what I'm very curious about, and that's what we in therapy put more and more in the center of our work. That's transgenerational trauma, and of course also transgenerational benefits. But again, the trauma is the unresolved, and it's something that we try to work through because it bothers us so much, or it restricts us so much in our daily lives. And you've already talked about the genocide in Armenia, and your the ethnic group that you belong to is scattered. It's a diaspora. So, well, how have you had like contact with this in your own family, and if so, how did you work with it?
Yeah, there are members of my family I've never met and never will meet, because I also don't fly anymore, and so that's just not going to change now. But I've also met lots and lots of Armenians in different parts of the world, from different parts of the world. We used to meet for international jamborees in Armenia, and I would see all of these people. And what was really funny, I remember, for example, I went to a meeting in Armenia when at the time we were invited by the Armenian government, one of the ministries. And whenever the Armenian representative from the USA got up to speak, all of the Armenian representatives from the Middle East, from Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, they would all boo. And I thought that was very, very amusing. The representative from the USA, who probably himself had also been born in the Middle East but moved afterwards to the USA, he also found that quite amusing. But it was, in many ways, it said a lot about Armenian identity. So wherever Armenians go, as much as they create a bubble around their communities, they still assimilate into the cultures, and they take on those characteristics, and they take on the language. So therefore, when you listen to a French Armenian speaking, there is an extremely strong French accent, or a British Armenian can have a strong British accent when they speak Armenian. And they also share, the national, if you can call them national characteristics. You can't, of course, because that's a horrible generalization. But if there were kinds of traits that you would recognize amongst some of them, like the Armenians from Italy, they were very flamboyant and very expressive with their hands and so on. And these kinds of things. So it's interesting the way the Armenian diaspora has developed, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the Jewish diaspora. They have a very particular sense of humor, and which also developed from their trauma, which is it's a way of turning things around and getting some distance, but at the same time putting it out there, right? And but you actually kind of successfully avoided the topic of transgenerational trauma by answering.
Sorry.
It's no problem if you don't want to talk about it. I'm just interested in how that informed your life, or where you can see it, where you like maybe looking back now, knowing more, how that has shaped you and your community at home, or where you were born and where you were raised.
Yeah. Armenians, when they learn about Armenia or being Armenian, they learn a number of realities. First of all, religion. Armenians are Christian apostolics. Then they learn, obviously, language. They learn culture. They learn within that music and literature and so on, and history and geography and so on. It's a normal things, but from a very Armenian perspective. When I say geography, I don't mean where are the rivers, where are the cities of the world, and so on, or geological characteristics. But you learn, where are the centers of the Armenian diaspora? So where is the Armenian community strong? Where can you go to, for example, if you wanted to, if you want to visit a country, where can you connect with an Armenian church, for example, or a community? These kinds of things is what I mean by geographical. And this is the positive side of the teachings. On the other side, though, you get, as we touched on, the genocide. And a lot of Armenians identify with their Armenianness through the experience of the genocide. So more or less 50% of the people that lived in Armenia at the time were massacred. Of those that remained from Western Armenia, they spread out around the world. So the traditional Armenian diaspora were the survivors of genocide, who were given comfort and shelter in the Middle East, so in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Palestine at the time as well. They were given shelter, they were given homes and food, and they were allowed to grow their communities. And from there, they spread out to all of the other countries. Essentially, that's what happened. So the Armenian question is whether, or we say Haitad, which is the Armenian case. This became an important part of the community, or at least some political parts of the community. There were also other parts that wanted to maintain the cultural side, but didn't want to engage in that political pursuit. And as you can imagine, what you said before was really important. You said it's very similar to the Jewish diaspora. The more I learn about different ethnic groups, the more I realize we all have so many similar characteristics. And I have a Jewish student, and we talk quite a bit. And, we laugh a lot about ourselves because exactly the Jewish community is so similar in so many ways with the Armenian community. And what is very interesting is the Armenian community is also very similar to the Turkish community, the Turkish diaspora, with whom this traditional enmity exists. There is also similarities with the Assyrian diaspora, and the Assyrians don't have a country, and so on. As in, you can go around and choose any sort of diaspora around the world, which recognizes itself as having a specific cultural heritage, and you will find similarities. And so I think, how do I deal with this transgenerational trauma? Is that the question now?
Yes, it has been for the past 15 minutes.
Oh, sorry, I was answering something else, I guess. But
no, it's very interesting to listen to you. I'm learning so much. Was also one of my goals, to learn more about Armenian culture and history, talking to you.
With regards to the transgenerational trauma, if hate remains the focus, then we can forget any possibility of reconciliation. If punishment is the priority, then there's not going to be much dialogue. As in, if somebody phones me up and says, "Hi, Zach, let's meet up, please. I want to put pins in your finger." I'm probably going to say, "Can I pass?" But if they say, "Come on, Zach, let's go for a coffee and a nice cake," there's a chance I'll turn up. What I see a lot of people doing is they want to confront whoever their enemy or the person they have a problem with. They want to confront these people, and they want to hurt them, and they want them to know they're going to be hurt, and then they can't believe it when they don't turn up to be hurt. And it's like, okay, where's the logic in that? So we really have to try to create an atmosphere where we can bring opposing sides together that have a genuine desire for reconciliation. And then after that, you can iron out the problems. What I know from what's happened between the Armenian and the Ottoman and then the Turk, the governments we have to talk about in many ways. You can't hold Turks responsible for what the government did over 600 years. A lot of events took place which people from both sides will look at and say, yeah, but this happened or this happened and so on. And of course, as an Armenian, and of course, I know that the history of the genocide, the Armenians didn't try to commit genocide on the Ottomans. So, I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing to consider. But there were also instances where Armenian soldiers did kill Turks, and there were Turks that were killed that were innocent and not involved in these, what had happened. But to sit down and have a conversation where you are talking about potential reconciliation, of course, at some point, recognition has to be made of the crimes that were committed. But okay, where do we want to go? What do we want to achieve? I don't want to keep fighting. I don't want my kids to keep fighting. I don't want my grandchildren to wake up and think they have to hate that person because that person is the grandchild of some other person. Where's it going to end? And we have to try to, if every parent's intention is that their child's life is better than their own, then we clearly have to find a new way of thinking.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to close this conversation. and it's about reconciliation and forgiveness. And letting go. This is also something that my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh tried to promote between Palestinians and Israelis, and he published a book about it, which is now downloadable as an ebook for free from Parallax Press, because they actually thought, okay, how can we help in the situation of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. Although even to say that between Palestinians and Israelis is kind of, difficult. Not all Palestinians are naturally in conflict with Israelis and the other way around, but you know what I'm talking about. So they actually, they're offering 4 books about peace work. And I can highly recommend that to anyone listening to this podcast. And we could put the link in I hope it's still available. I will check that. I think it's available in November. And I already downloaded a book, and there is among them one about the retreats that they did some years ago between Palestinians and Israelis. And that was exactly what they were doing. They were just listening to each other. After 1 week of being listened to by neutral persons, the 2 groups got together and they could really listen with an open heart and an open mind and really hear the other side. But first of all, they had to be heard, and they had to have that openness to reconcile and this will to end the negative spiral. And so thank you a lot for elaborating on that. I find that very inspirational. And maybe we can continue this conversation some other time.
Yeah, thank you for turning the tables as well so effectively. To be honest, when you suggested that this would be a way to go, I thought to myself, am I brave enough? But then I knew I was in safe hands. So thank you for that, Lilek, as well. And I do appreciate it too.
Thank you for your trust and your openness.
And Mike.